Test, 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 test. Let me test this speaker. Test, 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 test. What the heck? Let me do it this way. Let me test this speaker. All right, can everybody test. Now we got it. All right, thank you for the help. So let me just put this down. All right, guys, I'm gonna hit record for the confusion. All right. More. All right, everyone, what's going on? Welcome to another episode, Conspiracy or Just a Coincidence. I am Jack Allen. Today, we're going to be finishing up. First, follow me on Twitter at Conspiracy or JAC. Also on Gab. I have a website if you want to support the show. But if you can leave a review, I'm so thankful, eternally grateful. A few people have been like subscribing to my website or something, so that's awesome. I don't know how you do that or what that really means, but yeah. So we're gonna finish Rockefeller Medicine Man Part 2. I actually there's so many awesome facts in this. So if you didn't listen to the last episode, my super Cliff Notes version of it was medicine was very different when we first came to America and all over the world, but it was. You would become a doctor through apprenticeship, and there was lay healers and homeopathic. Eventually med schools started, but they would just lecture people, and anyone could afford it. You could work a job, go to night school to become a doctor if you're trying to raise your socioeconomic class. But then there became an issue because there was too many doctors. They weren't making enough money. These elitist doctors, they wanted the prestige, and they had some bumps in the road with Andrew Jackson. Eventually, though, they get their way, and Rockefeller and Carnegie, they realize Carnegie was given museums and organs, and this organs, not body organs and those kind of charities. And then they came up with an idea this isn't really giving us any more power, which we crave, right? So they said, let's do a planned philanthropy type of thing. So they started these foundations, created the General Education Board, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation. Now these sound great, right? The public hates these people at the time because they're overworking, they dominate society. They're just robber barons. They're greedy jerks. Well, so they do these things not out of the kindness of their heart, but because by giving these foundations, they're able to dictate, they go around legislation and around the state. And because back then politicians kind of cared about the people because it was still new. And so they use these things to manipulate and to trick and to, yes, my cat, he was scratching the wall earlier. But so they use these foundations to manipulate, right? And the public, though, even though they're physicians now of medical school, they still didn't trust these fancy people. The populism was strong back in the day, right? It was what they call supremacy now, nationalism. They were proud to be Americans. They didn't believe in elitism. They left that. That was in Europe. But propaganda changes that. Brainwashing changes that. They did this through so many different means with the foundation money and things like mandatory schooling that happened around the 1880s. In Massachusetts, they actually had to bring in the National Guard or the military because the parents didn't want to send their kids to a mandatory school. And it's funny how we just forget these things, or maybe the populace forgets it because they don't want to teach us that. But there was no money in healing people in the beginning. All they focused on was healing livestock because that's how they view you. They were less valuable than a livestock. Industrial Revolution, though, changes some things. And if you didn't listen to the episode, go listen to it because that was a very poor and quick overview. So we're going to continue, though. So medical science, it starts developing in capitalist countries. So I'm not going perfectly chronologically, but for your mind, you can think 1900s, right? Some of these things kind of cross over in those 1880s and 1890s, but So medical science, building on our last episode, it's becoming more and more intense, and they're getting more technology, more medical devices, more than just a stethoscope. They're getting x-ray machines and things like that. Well, more of this technology is required for this newfound science-backed medical practice research. So doctors that used to travel in a horse-drawn carriage to your house, they need other things to continue their practice, what they're taught, right? And so how do they get that fund? They can't buy an x-ray machine that's probably crazy money at the time. They can't buy all these insane things. So they have to pair up with a hospital. If you think about it today, I mean, it was still like in the 80s, you still had doctors that weren't affiliated with a hospital. Good luck finding one today. Almost every, like, there's probably, let's say like 5%, but for the most part, every doctor is affiliated with a hospital, because you can't afford everything. You can't have enough patients. And unless you're like, it's like this entrepreneurial myth. Okay. So like, if you are great at baking apple pies, that doesn't mean you can run an apple pie making business. So unless you have a doctor that is a great at running an apple pie making business and making apple pies, no one's going to try and build this huge doctor practice to compete with a hospital. It's just easier to pair up with a hospital, right? They'll give you the capital you need to buy whatever equipment you need. That makes sense. Okay. So things like operating rooms, x-rays, diagnostic tools, auxiliary personnel, all these things. Most hospitals in existence were created in the 1880s to the 1920s. In 1873, there were 178 hospitals, 178. By 1909, 4,359. How are they built? These different foundations and the elite putting money in. It wasn't really by taxpayer dollars. They're all maybe a little bit, but it's mostly funded by Rockefellers and Carnegies. Doctors are growing, increasingly dependent on the hospitals by 1929. 7 out of 10 physicians, even by then, had a hospital affiliation, totally dependent. What they love, right? They love having us. No individual, no buyer. You need oversight. You need government or elite oversight. Previously, they even had the poor people that could just pay what they could afford before this explosion of hospitals. And this was before, the 1915s till FDR, and we'll get to that. But the poor would pay just what they could afford. If they were sick, they would go to the hospital and they would pay what they could afford. That's the benefits of having a Christian nation, right? And so that changed after all these. It's turning into a business now. It's beyond the helping your fellow neighbor and paying that person so they can make a living as well. But they started becoming the research and teaching material. So you got a new doctor that needs to learn how to do whatever. Here's a poor person to do it on. To demonstrate the nobleness of the elite, people like Johns Hopkins willed a medical school and a hospital as a general university. He got his money from Baltimore and Ohio Railroad fortune. And I touched on this like last episode, but there is a lot of the doctors would go to Europe, Germany specifically, where the Illuminati are from. And I know that's weird to make that connection, the Illuminati and doctors, but that's how Skull and Bones started. They oh my gosh. And I forgot this last episode too, but whoever made their money from the opiate trade, they're related to the Roosevelts. Oh God. But they went to Germany, got trained and they brought Skull and Bones back. So a lot of these deans of medical schools, they went over to Germany to get trained on how they ran their medical schools, came back and brought whatever they brought there, what they were doing there back here. So I talked about Frederick Gates last episode. Gates ran the Rockefeller Foundation, if this is the first one you're listening to. Gates was a minister, a Baptist minister that Rockefeller really respected. And so the Rockefeller Foundation, they wanted to organize the medical research. I think I talked about that. So Rockefeller became, though, the single biggest source of capital for medical development and medical science in the United States. Wonderful, right? He just cares so much about our people He won't change your working slave labor for 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, but he'll donate some money so you can have a hospital when you get sick from overworking and not being able to afford any good nutrition, everything like that. And which was also interesting though, Rockefeller's foundation, like doctors didn't all agree with this new medicine. Like you have a lot of like older people like boomers today, right? You got a lot of these old time doctors. They didn't agree with a lot of stuff that they were teaching and trying to do, but they did it anyway. Who has the power, the profession or the millionaire corporate capitalist? And so also to help these new hospitals that they're creating in new medical science, all the elite owned papers lauded the founding of the Rockefeller Institute. Of course, just like they do today. Like it's the same tactics, but I don't know why I never thought about this. And everyone, especially older people, they'll say, oh, I miss when the news told the news, but they never told the news, right? They've been lying since the printing press started. They've been lying. The people who control the finances, they control the information, they control the flow of information, they control what you hear and see. And that's why it hasn't changed. It's actually, I think, like the internet, though, it has brought so many negatives with social media and people showing these beautiful lives when really they hate themselves. And you just see this shiny outside, and it causes all this stress in young people, especially. The internet, though, is such, I mean, all the people that I talk to you guys on Twitter, like, dude, without the internet, I would have never met you. And we have our little own community of people who think similar. And though we don't agree on everything by any stretch of the imagination, we have like a group that we can talk to and bounce ideas off of, which I guess could have been done at bars, but it's definitely a wider net. All right. Oh, Hahnemann Hospital. If you guys, this was a hospital in Philadelphia. It got bought by Chinese real estate agents, and I've been there a few times. But Hahnemann, he was one of these guys that hated the Rockefeller Foundation, despised it, hated all these foundations changing medicine. He was a homeopathic medicine doctor, and he said the tragic state of medicine is an immense potential for corruption. And it's awesome. It's like just ironic that now his namesake gets closed down and bought by Chinese real estate. But all the elites got in on these endowments, giving millions, dividends as pensions. One thing I found real interesting was the boss man, Rockefeller. He was a big supporter of homeopathy, and his Reverend Gates, who controlled the foundations, and his son were ardent, converted science religion worshipers, right? And the senior Rockefeller, he wanted to give $45 million to the homeopathic doctors, and his son and Gates, he said, I want them to have a fair and courteous and liberal treatment extended to them, which is interesting. I thought that was interesting. I mean, he was a cutthroat and manipulative, but it just, I don't know, maybe it humanizes him a little bit. Okay, so this is a huge fact to get in your head. So another reason why they're funding all this capitalistic medicine, because they know they're making money, but before, like I said in the preview, they funded animal research because livestock was worth more. But now they're starting to realize something. You're having factories, and a healthier population means a healthier workforce. So the fundamental aim of medical science was not to cure people. Even back then in 1900, Gates, this is his quote, fundamental aim of medical science is not to cure, but to prevent of disease. At the time, because people, you have to remember, around this turn of the century, I mean, now we have underground plumbing in these areas, but 20 years previous to that, people have their livestock, sleeping next to their livestock or maybe a neighbor's livestock, drinking the same water from a well or from something that the animals, urine and fecal matter is going into. You're living in a shack with no windows. You're sharecropping. You're working 18 hours out of a day. just horrible living conditions, or you're bent over like canning something in a factory. So at the time, 20% of employees of large companies were homesick each day. 1/5 out of everybody was sick. And they weren't getting PTO, by the way. But so Gates, in 1925, they sponsored this preventative medical care on a large scale because they found that health is profitable in a variety of ways. And just so you know, like, medical care has been used like this for a while. Southern slave owners also would have their slaves looked at for the same reason, for preventative care, because they also did in 1861. The U.S. Sanitary Commission of the tyrannical North sent Union soldiers down to the South, saving soldiers' lives because they deduced that it would reduce the monetary cost of the war if you could preserve the life of the soldier. My great grandfather, he was in the Civil War. Sadly, he was for the Union, but he had one of those awesome crazy mustaches. I have a photo of it. They found them out that each soldier's life is worth no less than $1,000 a day to society. How sick is it that you have to you did the math to deduce a numerical value for a human's life? And they do that today, right? In so many ways. So shortage of workers during the war, it was different because prior to the war, they had like an unlimited supply of workers. How? Well, they just flooded the country with immigrants. And I talked about this last time. Immigration, they want you to feel this emotional response, but it's not because they want you. They don't care that you feel bad. They don't feel bad for them. They need to bring them in because these power companies, these corporations that run the world, they want cheap labor. So how do you get cheap labor? Well, the people that are Americans, they're not having enough kids. So you can't get them. So you need to bring in a constant stream of new able-bodied young men and women to keep your low labor jobs running. Amazon, things like that. Yeah. Okay. So the shortage of the war, they were having a rapid turnover of workers, causes to hit the only thing they care about, profit. Poor working conditions were causing strikes, and awesome strikes, like violent, not awesome for the people dead, but scaring the people. So they granted a decrease in profits to reduce these type of things. The main guys, steel, railroads, oil, they created a complete medical care system for their workers. They hired physicians to check their workers whenever, weekly or monthly. And why do they do that? Because they care? No, because people are violently striking, killing their profit. They're terrified that they're going to come to their office and rip them out. So this is what they do. They give you little wins. All the time they give us little wins because the long plan is still moving. They'll take this hit. They'll lose the battle. They're going to win the war unless we wise up. Rockefeller Organization and Gates, they wanted to eradicate hookworm in the South. How kind. They thought it was the cause of the laziness in the South. That's not what they wanted. They didn't care about hookworm. They wanted more productive Southerners because they're about to build up the industry there since we just demolished the South in the Civil War. And they're like, oh, well, we can get cheap laborers because they have no work. We can get cheap land because there's no factories. So let's do it. Gates even deduced that 25% more laborers to secure the same results with areas with no hookworm. So if there was hookworm, it was a 25% reduce. Like I said, these guys were smart, evil geniuses. Health insurance, workers' compensation, other Social Security members would reduce the appeal for this radical socialist movements that were sweeping Europe and America. Oh, I jumped my line that they'll take a battle loss, but and I use this example, the battles, like what happens there, I think it's June, right? Gay Pride Month or whatever. And all these things, they do these woke things. They don't care. They don't care. I don't know how people don't see that. Like people that are like super woke, like, oh, look, Amazon is supporting our cause. They're supporting your cause because it's cheaper for me to paint my logo rainbow and to send out a few tweets to and then rather than paying people a salary that they could live on. It's so much easier. It's so much easier. That's why they all do it. They don't care. I don't know how. If I were in a minority group, whatever it is, I am the oddball, and I see Amazon supporting my cause, I would immediately say, "Whoa! If Amazon is supporting what I believe, or why are we on the same page?" It's the same thing as like Rockefeller, you know what I mean? Like, but these, I don't know why these people don't think of that. They might be so blinded by like this championing this message that that's their identity. I guess. I don't know. I don't know. It blows my mind though. Like, how do you come up with that if you're supporting, if Amazon is supporting what you believe, that you're in the right? I think it might be like NARS. I don't know what it is. Okay. So now it didn't just happen in America. China Gates. So at the time, we're sending religious missionaries. Well, not we, like, but Christians are sending religious missionaries to the East to build to China, to Japan, all these places. Well, Gates has a brilliant idea, and Rockefeller Jr. Why don't we send medical missionaries or medical whatever? And the quote, like one is, missionary enterprise is immensely profitable. Missionaries were the velvet glove of imperialism, but soon realized medicine and public health were far more effective than the missionaries or armies in pursuing the same ends. Right? So what do we do to, like, we now today we send gender studies into their country to do but you got imperialism takes so many forms. The military is probably like the worst way to do it. The best ways to do it are to come with like, for example, I try not to get too derailed, but then it just clicks things in my brain. During World War One, during the Russian, or I guess after Russian Revolution, you have the Bolsheviks take over. Well, what do? We create the American Red Cross. And the American Red Cross was created by this lady. Her dad was a millionaire. So were initial intentions good? I don't know. I can't say. But regardless what happened, the first one they wanted to send doctors and nurses over to Bolshevik Russia because they were poor, because nobody was working. They were all being murdered and slaughtered by the Bolsheviks. Well, of the first American Red Cross mission, all funded by the elites because they care, I think it was 25 out of the 32 were lawyers, lawyers, politicians. It was 2 doctors and like 1 nurse or something. Both doctors left within the first month because they weren't doing anything to help the people they're under the original guise. And look at the Red Cross today. Their board or whatever makes millions for their profit. So he created Peking Union Medical College, gave $45 million for the Chinese medical program, did it to the Philippines. And what are they doing here? Like all these places that have these holistic medicines for thousands of years, maybe it tied in with their religion. They're replacing it with the new religion of the time, modern medicine and capitalism. And even newspapers, like because the news today is just so goddamn horrible. But even back then, even though they ran them, I'm sure the oversight wasn't as good as it is today. The papers were criticizing the Carnegie and Rockefeller. Turn our schools into the mills for the manufacture of men and women, according to Rockefeller and Carnegie specifications. Medicine is even more insidious. This is because that was also another reason why colleges were created. They weren't created to better the country. They needed workers. They needed people that could oversee the hard hands, as the one guy called them. And that's why they push, especially private universities. So Gates, he was a minister. Like I said, he switched religion he replaced it with medicine. And he writes that like in his diary. He converted from baptism to capitalism and finally to scientism. What do we have today? People make fun of you for believing in God, which is, it's so crazy. And I can see that because in school, remember what I was taught. I remember, I graduated, or I was in middle school in the 2005, we'll say. And in 2005, I remember my teacher taught evolution, and I was a public school, evolution and versus intelligent design. And I remember they, kind of laughed at, not laughed, but the way they explained evolution was as fact and intelligent design as so if you believe, that. And I remember leaving and going, my dad's pretty religious, and I would go to church and think this doesn't make any sense. We have all for monkeys. Why would God make us monkeys? Is that what he meant to do? And all these things. And when you really, there's this quote in the beginning of astrophysics, the first sip out of the glass, there is no God. By the time you're at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you, because things are just so, everything, our hands are, the way we're created, it's by accident. The odds of that are astronomical. Okay. I keep getting off of track. So all power joined in this new religion of science. Research institutes are the new temples. And we see that today. Now it is full blown. Back then you had people fighting that back. But today you're the oddity for believing it. So at this time, in the 1880s and industrialist era, people saw the horrible conditions that workers were working in. Physicians said it was the miserable living conditions, the malnutrition, the general poverty. They're the cause of disease. Well, here comes science to tell them, no. It's not this horrible life that you're living in, living next to filth, never doing anything healthy. It's not that. No, it's not that. It's this thing that you can't see, this bacteria. And science tells us it's this bacteria that comes into your body and it hurts you. And that's why you're not feeling well. It's not because we're working you too hard. No, it's not your environment that we've created for you of this shack. No. It's this thing. Even though at the same time people could have the same people could have the same bacteria in them and remain healthy, but other bodies, it affects them horribly. So this alone shows you that environment has way bigger part than these things you cannot see. If you're a healthy person, I don't want to get too deep in that because I don't want to get kicked off YouTube, but you guys know what I'm saying. If it's purely just that, your body, okay, we got it. You got it. So their scientists and doctors they were both, there's two sides. So people that love this new bacteria, germ theory, and others that thought they believe germ theory, but they also believe that your environment is the most important thing. It's not the germs. You can't control that. You can control the environment. And if you have a good environment, you have a good, healthy body, you eat well, you get a lot of sleep, drink water, clean water. That's what we need to focus on. Well, can you guess who got the funding? It wasn't the environment people. It was the pure germ theory people. And that starts us down this road that we're in today. We're at the end of the road, I guess, right? We already went on the highway or got on a jet. So it's not one's place in capitalist class structure that breeds misery. It is the disease that is the cause of misery attributed to poverty. I think Gates, that was his quote. For sure. The whole system was set up to hide the creator. Absolutely. It's cheaper to study germs and microscopes and how to handle it after they get sick, rather than to study the social factors that they're the cause of, the ones funding the studies that are causing the disease and the sickness. Just crazy, right? That's how it started. That. You had these two camps, and now you don't have the environment camp. I'm using environment to kind of cleanliness, healthiness, all those things. So Gates, he was a minister, like I said, runner of the Rockefeller Foundation. Just so I know I'm saying a lot of names, just to remind anybody. And he had a heart. He was a minister, so he wanted to take the 2% extra of the ROI, return on investment, and raise it to 5%. And he wanted to cut down their hours on labor, improve living conditions. But then he realized, well, that would be good. But what if we give them distractions? That'll help keep them peaceful. Music, pictures, anything that can cultivate their mind. And it wasn't compassion. It was out of fear of them being ripped from their homes and torn apart in mob justice. And what do they do today? What do they do today to take you out that, I don't live in the city, but to take you out of that you're living in this one bedroom or studio apartment with bugs off, with people on top of you? What do? They ply you with TV and junk food and sports and video games to pacify you because they're terrified. If it's like that Bug's Life, if the ants ever realized that we outnumber them 100 to 1, it'd be over. But people would much rather relax. They're tired from work. They just want to sit on the couch, order Uber Eats, watch a movie, watch a TV show, and that's what they want to do. So this was like perfect timing that they're starting these kind of like distractions and giving you they're conceding some battles because World War I started. All the socialist and progressive movements at the time, which were probably more right on the actual good policies as opposed to today, they put a squash on it. Now, patriotism, full employment overwhelmed the movements. Now, people that were working, we need to stick together to fight these, the false flag that was the sinking of the Lusitania. The Germans sunk a boat of civilians. We need to go get them. Meanwhile, there was actually tons of ammunitions on the ship. They just put the Germans told the Americans, don't sail in these waters. And Woodrow Wilson, he put it through. Don't worry. He also, the people, that whole, I don't want to get into World War I, but that was a scam. But anyway, just what they do, they bring us together after we're fighting, scaring them, false flag event. So in 1901, the AMA, which you might hear that name a lot, that acronym, American Medical Association, it had 8,000 members. In 1910, 70,000 doctors. 1901 had more doctors than 1910, or maybe a little before that, and more doctors. It wasn't that there was now more doctors, it's that they're realizing we can create policy if we stick together. And we're getting funding, all these things like that. There was and before this happened, so in 1901, the AMA had a quote, "Rich men may injure the cause of medical education. So trust the science, trust the AMA." Well, there's a quote from the AMA, and they were right on the money. They got help from the Carnegie Foundation. Gave $10 million endowment for medical education. But here's the stipulation. Each college must meet the conditions. No religious schools, of course. Science is your new religion, you plebes. Religious schools are asking, like, please, what can we do? We need this money. So there's this thing called the Flexner Report. And this was really like the biggest change. This is what like solidified the newfound science religion that we have in America. He said, Flexner, so they sent this guy, Flexner, no medical background, as all good bureaucratic people are. We're gonna send him around to every single medical school, and he's gonna give you a report, see if you're good enough, or what you need to do to get access to these Carnegie Foundation funds. He visited 155 medical schools in the U.S. and Canada, and who was the gold standard? Of course, Skull and Bones trained dean of their medical school, Johns Hopkins, was the gold standards. So if it was deemed good, gifts would flow from the kind hands of Mr. Carnegie. If they did not, it would ensure their demise. Resisting, oh, you can't come to my medical school. I don't want you're not even a physician. You're not even practicing. What do you know about medical things? Well, that's suspicious, guys. If you had nothing to fear, you would let me look and examine you and rate you. Then, if you also resist, I'm going to use my newspaper's connections to write propaganda, to ridicule you and say, look at this shoddy medical school here. They won't even, they're so, it's so bad, they won't even allow me to look at their school. So what do you think they did? They let them in. And what do they do today if you step out of line? I don't care about Nicki Minaj in any way, shape, or form, but I think she's probably a net negative, even though this happened. But she spoke out of what is deemed okay to say, ridiculed. She's gonna apologize. That's my bet. She'll probably apologize. We'll see though. Sometimes they get so narcissistic that they won't. But they ridiculing her now, ridiculing her, propaganda, and that's just what they do. They will destroy you. They don't ever need to kill you or think. They will destroy your life. And Flexner, as any loser with power, like every politician we have, I just imagine them all like those kids that are just weird, that are like they don't know how to talk to people. They're socially inept and awkward. They get this power after years of just being of stronger men or women taking the lead of them being behind, afraid. They get this power. They love it. They thrive under it. And that's what this Fleckner guy was. He was feared. He walked in the building. Everyone treated him with like a red carpet because he deemed whether you would succeed or not. And I can't blame those people for doing that. But he was hasty. He judged quickly. And of course, his views matched perfectly with what the foundations wanted. And to hide the fact that he was doing this for the foundations, they had him speak at an AMA event months before the release of the report. So to create this expert aura about him. So they also proposed now, Flexner did, that you can't. So back then people could go to right to medical school. There was no requirements. You paid. If you passed the test or whatever, you became a doctor. Well, so they proposed, no, there's too many doctors still. Even though we're limiting the amount of schools by this report, you need to have 2 years of college for admission into medical school. Listen, this was a crazy statistic. At this time in 1908, 15% of the high school population was only enrolled in high school. 15%. In college, 5% of the college-age young men and women, 5% of the whole nation were in college. So which 5% is that? All wealthy, elite people, which means they came from whatever their stock was teaching, whatever their little country clubs were talking about, whatever their fathers were talking about. That was the mindset that they brought to college. They spread out. They became the college educators, and they taught their beliefs. And it just leads us, and that's the system that we get today. 5%. It wasn't regular people that were starting these colleges and universities and being the professors. It was top echelon or socioeconomic class people. The impact of the report: eliminated 92 schools, closed between 1904 and 1915. He eventually goes to Europe to study their medical education there. And so when he came back, he realized, or this is the story, he came back, all your colleges in Europe, their medical schools, the teachers did not practice medicine at all. They just were scientists. And the powers that be wanted just scientists devoted to science, causes of disease, and less the art of bedside manner. Why would they want that? I mean, my take is that you have people that only study science, that only are in a lab studying germs. You lessens the humanization of a person. So now you're not thinking about that environment aspect at all. You're not thinking about living in poverty, of eating poor foods, of only having access to certain things. Instead, you look at it as a purely like a germ entering a body, and this is how you fix that, those kind of things, right? It like just dehumanizes people. So finally, this became in the proposal. So Hopkins did it first. They said, "Oh, it's amazing. It's amazing. It's we've never been so successful." So none of their teachers were allowed to practice. And this was hard to propose because at this time colleges weren't endowed like they are now. But with this extra money, they'd be able to pay the professors enough to encourage them not to practice on the side. And Harvard actually refused to accept this plan, which is like, I don't know, I just found that like funny. And because the Boston elite, they had a lot of money that was outside of Rockefeller and Carnegie. And they said, no, we're going to fund Harvard. Our doctors don't need to do that. It was like a gentleman agreement. So they didn't really care about Harvard. They said, okay, they're not talking about what we're requiring, so we're not going to bash them over the head. Columbia University, though, their president, he rejected the proposal. He said it was to the best interest of the public and education to have them practice medicine and not just science. It makes zero sense. And he was a very religious man. Well, they can't buy this guy off because he's an honest Christian. Well, so what happens? The hospitals that work with Columbia University, the hospital trustees, who are the trustees? Well, most likely the people in charge of Rockefeller foundations and other elite foundations. He said it was the best, they said, if you don't like this, the hospital will sever ties with your college. And so what do you think happens? Right? You won't have a hospital to teach your kids in if you don't require your teachers to be full-time teachers. Eventually they get this, through. Public finds out it's blackmailing the colleges. Eventually this kind of withers away, but today you still see that primarily. Maybe they practice for a little bit, but most people like in anatomy and things like that, they're not physicians. They didn't practice. State universities, real quickly, this isn't like that important, but so primarily when this foundation started, it was for private universities. Gates and felt that he couldn't control the state universities because they're ran by legislators and public people and public approval and things like that. And he wanted nothing of the foundation to do with them. He couldn't manipulate them enough because of that ability that it's ran by legislators and the general public, only private universities. But that became like antiquated idea. So eventually he gets pushed out because he refuses to adapt, as many older people do. And they realize, oh, well, we can still push this propaganda to require, and that's what they do. They just push propaganda about this is what makes a good medical school, a good hospital, and that gets filtered down to the state universities. And they continue to get a little bit of funding they get funding from the foundations. And then we come to today, right? So these are like the really good facts. So I'm trying to, now we're at like my favorite part. Like I wanted to tweet about it, but I didn't want to blow the all the info on the tweets. All right. Chapter epilogue. Okay. So medicine from 1890 to 1925, the medical profession changed. Industrial capitalism created this new role for the new religion of science, as I talked about. Scientists seized the chances because previous that they didn't have a lot of funding. They were kind of broke. These nerds had no power. They weren't looked at like they are today. Like, oh, here's an action figure of Anthony Fauci. Nobody cared. It was a mercantile, manly, masculine society. They didn't care about dorks playing in a lab, lighting Bunsen burners. So these scientists seize the chances. They're getting rewarded. They'll sell their soul for money and for power, prestige, achievements, to be clapped at about doing stuff. And universities were the way that created this new science system. Eventually, though, medical professionals, so now they created these doctors, they got prestige, they got power, they have money. Well, the same forces that did that, they undermined them. They did this by increasing their reliance on technology in the medical care system. So now this independent group that finally got the power and all the things they need, they get kind of stabbed in the back. I don't feel bad for them. I don't. So these technologies, I think I said, they can't be paid on patient fees alone. And treatment facilities made the physician care more technologically advanced, but more and more is needed, more and more money needed. So they do this in a few different ways. Pharmaceutical companies creating new drugs. Just imagine back in the day, though, you didn't need a prescription. You went to your doctor, he probably had it on him, he would mix it up and give you the medicine. Crazy, right? Well, that changed in 1920s. Now you need a prescription. So now you have insurance through, if you're working at like a big industry, you have medication, medical equipment, hospital care, all in the kingdom that the physicians reign supreme in. So it's kind of like a monopoly of expertise that once was more your neighbor, not your neighbor, but like your local leader, not shaman, but layman or healer, became this more elitist class. So I talked about how, so that was like they created pharmaceuticals that now have like all this prestige to get them, propaganda, all these things are creating this huge capitalistic system that is our current healthcare system. And I think I talked about this last time, but it's just so important for people to know. We'll get to it later. So 1947, Blue Cross enrollment, Blue Cross Blue Shield, the monsters of insurance, they're getting big. Enrollment's 27 million, so it's 19% of the population. So not too huge. It's like a new commodity. But so if you guys didn't know this, I didn't know this, but Blue Cross and Blue Shield, they're nonprofit. They are nonprofit. Do you want to know what their net income was last year after they paid all their people, after they paid all their expenses? $680 million for a nonprofit. Untaxed, it's not taxed, 680 million. What if you're nonprofit and you're paying these exorbitant salaries of these top people? What are you doing with that 680 million year after year? They don't lose money any years. They've created quite, I'm sure, a safety net. Think of all the people that have poor insurance and they try to save their kid's life. They go bankrupt. Well, you can't even go, I don't think you can even go bankrupt. You have to pay your medical bills or something. I don't know. But think of all the people that have spent their life savings to save a loved one that had in private insurance. And it said 680 million, the nonprofit that you pay every month had. It's just, and it's not like it's like, oh, buy Blue Cross, buy these private insurances. It'll be good for you. It'll help you just in case. No, they market the shit out of it. Like it's just, how is that allowed? Like the system is so broken. It's beyond fixable. In 1976, General Motors spent more on Blue Cross Blue Shield plans than it did on purchases from U.S. Steel for the people's safety and health, of course. So GM does this because it wants to market it to get its new employees, and it's a double win because Blue Cross makes a boatload of money. GM probably saves their work. They have more workers now that aren't as sick. They can continue. Obviously we ship that to China, so what does it matter? But at the time, so as opposed to American health insurance, we always get, I don't know if it's like brainwashing. I mean, not brain, but like propaganda. Like for a while, I was like, so like socialism is the worst. And I'm not saying socialism is the answer. I don't know what the answer is, but we like compare our capitalistic healthcare society versus the socialist or universal medical thing. And there's clearly cons and negatives to both, right? We have like way more expensive care. My fiance's sister, she had a baby, a C-section. There's like some issues. It cost $63,000 for the child to be born, and it cost her $62,000 to have for her. And she was in the hospital, I think, like 3 days, maybe 4 days, maybe 4 or 5 days, 4 or 5 days. $124,000. So she had to pay out of pocket $8,000 to have her kid. That makes you should be given money to have a kid if you are an American, because then you wouldn't need to bring so many immigrants. You would be able to keep America the same population. People that have similar cultural values, all those kind of things. So European health insurance programs were established pretty early by conservative governments in response to this militant working class revolution. That was happening in America as well. Lloyd George, who was the prime minister in Britain, did it in 1911, and he was a conservative. I don't think they call them the Tories. And he was a super corrupt guy, super corrupt, helping arms dealers that were funding the Germans. So socialist parties are winning more and more in the elections in the West world, Europe. But the AMA was vehemently opposing federal intervention in our medical system. Why would they do that? Obviously money. And the new deal by FDR hate him as well, but regardless, he wanted a national health insurance program in response to this, the depression, the outrage, the militant strikes. The AMA was powerful enough to knock that down. And they agreed, again, those little victories. FDR probably didn't, he knew what he was doing. He was funded by the same people that are always funding the presidency. But he said, okay, well, I want this, but you know what? Let's just make sure if you're on Social Security, you have medical benefits. It's taken for by the state. And so the AMA agreed to that, or whoever agreed to that, but that was the plan all along. You have to just accept these people are good actors. They know they may not even know what they're fighting, but they do what they're told. In the 1960s, like with LBJ, I'm guessing welfare funded Medicaid gets passed. Further, you would think that would signal the decline of medical professionals' power, but I'll get to why that happened. Capital investment grows in hospital. Rose 3 times as fast after medical care and Medicaid are passed. And now you'd think this is good, having a safety net for poor people that can't afford private health insurance. Now they have health insurance, right? So if they go to the hospital, they'll be taken care of. And I agree with that. That people if you have a health issue, you deserve to be able to if you work 40 hours a week, you deserve medical care. It shouldn't make you go homeless. And even homeless people that don't work and they refuse to work, I have a heart, so they deserve medical care too. I got medical care on welfare or whatever. So that not that I got anything. I was just there for chained to a hospital bed. But oh yeah. Well, we're talking about welfare and medical care. So why they passed this stuff, right? Is it because maybe they cared? Maybe they had a heart? No, it wasn't because they had a heart all of a sudden. It's because now you have our government's getting bigger and bigger. We are a war machine, dude. And we are the most powerful country in the world in 1960. Well, now you have this big, huge new government backing the medical industry, giving them a baseline of support no matter what. So it can just grow and grow. So it creates a guaranteed set amount of income. Banks were winning because of this, because now the hospital's oh, we're getting money. Let's buy some shit. And so they're getting loans from the banks the hospitals are getting a guaranteed set income because of the government. They're buying more expensive equipment, more expensive devices, funding more science, all these, they domino effect. So what hospitals did with this guaranteed government income, well, now people in low income areas, they're getting surgery more than needed by a dramatic amount. Why? Because this gives there's huge monetary incentives to do so. Whereas a private insurance would probably like say, we're not paying for that. That's not needed because they don't want to spend the money. But the welfare, they're going to spend it regardless. Like, you think a bureaucrat knows whether that's needed or not? And this isn't the fault of any person. It's just that's a cap. So if you're not a great surgeon, right? You're employed in a horrible area that doesn't have a lot of like those surgeries that make hospitals money. Well, so the US has, let's just do these facts. Poor adults make more visits to the hospital than non-poor adults. This is because lack of preventative care and this thing that we keep seeing, poor environment, right? Poverty, poor food choices, poor air pollution, noise pollution, all those things. So the US has twice the ratio of full-time surgeons to its population than any country, England, all of them, and twice the rate of surgery. Now, is that because we get a lot more plastic? And this book was written in 1978. So these numbers obviously could have changed. So I want to give that, I don't want to mislead anyone. But why would that be at that time, right? Are people getting boob jobs, all these things? No, they're not, right? It's 1980. But it's because these poor people are funded by welfare. So it's guaranteed, it's a lot of money the government's going to pay your hospital. And these hospitals, they're nonprofit. They need to make a profit, though, a huge profit. All right. 1974, 2.4 million unnecessary operations were performed, resulting in 11,900 deaths and gave the hospitals $3.9 billion. So you can see the incentive to perform huge tests, and we'll get to that once. So major source of revenue for underemployed surgeon, underutilized hospital facilities is welfare patients, people on Medicare or Medicaid, whichever one's for welfare, to have more and more things done that you wouldn't do for somebody with private insurance. Also, you have this issue with doctors in a capitalist society. Mississippi has 1/3 the doctors than of New York. Less and less doctors go into primary care. Why? Because you get paid more to specialize. It's a capitalistic world, and that promotes, if you're already doing all this required schooling, you might as well go specialize. Now, this is what so has medicine saved us from everything? And here we'll start. So epidemiological evidence supports the conclusion that medical science has played a relatively small role in reducing morbidity and more mortality. And science and coronavirus like, what? No, that's a lie. That's a lie. Get my 75th in the shoulder. So the great health decline in the West from the 18th century were due to four factors: poor nutrition, which got improved with our nutrition. So the reason why people start living longer at the end of the 18th century: nutrition, improved food supplies, environmental sanitation measures. So now you have underwater pipes filtering the water filth from the livestock animals that you're sleeping next to. So now you have uncontaminated water, which is very beneficial for everyone, obviously, but especially children. So you had so many kid deaths then. And this decline of lots of deaths was underway far before germ theory was ever accepted. Okay, it's our graph of people dying is drastically reduced with better nutrition because we're getting smarter about agriculture, water cleanliness, standard of living increases. The standard of living because now they can have enough food, they can afford a big enough house, there's all this land, you have a substantial increase in population, which previous, if you had a large family, you would have starved because there wouldn't have been enough food. So now you have enough food. Huge families have huge birth rates. This jacks up the average life expectancy in America. And then you have preventative and therapeutical measures which to drastically decrease the infant mortality rates. And these are things like sterilization, antibiotics, not getting gangrene when you got a slice in your leg. Major killing diseases of the 19th century decreased substantially before the discovery of medical cures and even immunization. Immunization. Ugh, said it too close. But anyway, TB, tuberculosis in mid 1850s killed 500 out of every 100,000 people. And then 1900s, it killed 200 out of every 100,000 people. And by 1967, 3 out of every 100,000 people. This tremendous decline was only slightly affected by the introduction of collapse therapy in the 1930s. I didn't look up what collapse therapy was. I should have asked Miss Liv Allen. She probably would have known. And chemotherapy in the 1950s. That's when chemotherapy was invented, 1950s. And isn't it insane? I asked her last night, like, is there any other new thing besides chemo and radiation that we use that's the best defense against cancer? And she said she didn't, like, there's different versions of it now, but it's still the same thing. Isn't that crazy? Like, every year there's at least 20 new pharmaceutical companies created. Like, I'm not joking, like 20. They all, do their trials, billions of dollars paid. They create a new drug, they put it on market, and it doesn't do anything. It doesn't increase life expectancy. And these people that with these sad situations with a child or a loved one, they fight to get their loved one in this clinical trial. They say, oh, we think this is going to cure this thing. So yeah, you can get your kid in, or we have shown some good results. It cost 100, there was one that I saw, 1 year of it was $1.6 million, 1.6 million for like this rare disease. And it shows no increase of life expectancy. And how do they get around that? Well, they don't say that it's going to cure it. They use marketing. They know what they're allowed to legally say. They show you this nice commercial or nice ad of a sick child getting better, and they are out of options and they just need a hope. And this is what they partake in. And they take your $1.5 million and they then goes to the top. They goes to these top people that started the company, and they go reinvest a new company on a new molecule that does the same thing. It's so sad. It's so sad. The mortality rates were same for England. They were going down in this time because of the sanitation, the nutrition, the working conditions are changing. It had very little to do with medical science benefits. Children most benefited. The average life expectancy of a baby born in 1900 was 47. A baby in 1971. And this huge increase is due to a sharp decline in children death. That's why because you had so many kids dying from flu, diarrhea, scarlet fever, diphtheria, whooping cough, measles. How did you increase this life expectancy so much? Well, you eliminated child labor, you pasteurized milk, and not that like non-pasteurized milk is bad, but it doesn't have like a long shelf life, and people are greedy and selling old milk. They'll stretch it, and that killed a lot of kids. Infant death. So is it from the environment, or was it just these medicines that changed all this stuff? And I would think that obviously medicines help, obviously, and we'll get to more like antibiotics, but all those things, they are game changers, huge. But is it just those, or is it because our environment, we got clean water, sterilization, enough food to feed your family? Little babies weren't dying because of dirty water, getting diarrhea from it, getting more dirty water, feeding old food. Infant death rates are still correlated to the environment today. 12 European countries have a lower infant death rate than the US. They also have stronger GMO rules as well. Conspiracy or just a coincidence? The more privileged your class is, the less likely you are to get sick and die at each age. It's almost like if you would remove the poverty, it would drastically alter health status. Environmental, occupational pollutants, also major determinants of disease, even deemed normal levels of air pollution by our wonderful governing bodies, have been associated with increased rates of disease. Millions of union workers suffering temporary, permanent disabling jobs. That kills over 100,000 people a year. Hypertension associated with living in an urban society. So whether a person remains healthy is much more environment than determined with things that you cannot see, and there is examples to every rule, always examples to every rule. But our governing bodies want you to worry about things you can't see because they don't want to fix the water in Flint, Michigan. They don't want to fix how, their microplastics that they built, that they made with their oil things are going in your water and having ungodly known effects on our bodies because it's never happened before. They want to blame things that you can't see instead of blaming, we really don't know if cell phone radiation could cause cancer. We really don't know if GMO foods and the long-term effects of what that does going into your body. But they blame these things that you cannot see for getting you sick. Because if it came back on the top elites, people that own these things, that made these decisions, there would be outrage. There would be mob rule. So they bombard you with, it's your fault that you got sick. It's your fault. It's your fault that you caught this cold, that because of whatever, mask or whatever you want to say. Not their fault. Not their fault for trying to stretch, get 2 more cents per product to take all these polluting, unhealthy decisions. No, it's not their fault. It's that guy driving his car 2 hours to get to his job because he can't find another job, but it's his fault. He's polluting the air. 1930s, most drugs are palliative, reducing discomfort. That's what palliative means. I think Liv would know. So penicillin comes out in the 40s, groundbreaking, right? Groundbreaking. Other antibiotics in the 50s, groundbreaking. Nobel Prize, amazing, right? Those things are great medicines. They've saved countless of thousands of millions of lives. Again, what have they created since? They created Quaaludes in the 80s, though, and they created OxyContin in the 2000s. That's what shows you how great pharma is. Polio. Just another example. So polio's, my dad, every mom was scared. They were scared that their kid was going to get polio. They saw those iron lungs. And I showed, the iron lung. If you go look it up, if you don't know what it was like this iron box that would breathe for you. And every parent was terrified that their kid was going to get polio. You know how many cases there were of polio in 1954, the outbreak era of polio? 18,000 cases of polio. Out of millions of people, 18,000. And they sent propaganda to scare the shit out of parents. There were 6 in 1975. So was that because of the schmack's or was it because DDT poisoning, which they have ads, pour it on your food, DDT is good for me, caused paralysis and polio-like symptoms and toxicity of DDT toxicity? Rubella or German measles, 47,000 cases before I put word to not say the word, what they want everyone to take now. I don't want to say the words. I don't know if YouTube's algorithm, but 47,000 cases worldwide right before they came out with EAN. and it went to 16,353 cases in 1975. Did it eliminate it? How many adverse reactions were there? So that's like, half, more than half, 40%. Prior to the World War II, federal government support was minor. Eisenhower warned, military industrial complex and government funded science. Well, that shot up. In 38, 2.8 million, 1944, 15 million. Research just kept going up. Ranks of teachers matched the huge availability of funds. Faculty was 2,200 medical faculty in 1950, 24,000 in 1973. There were more schools, right? No, there was less schools. They're building the base of this empire. The corporate class supported scientific medicine because it supported the same political and economic goals as them. It's cheaper to blame unseeable agents of death and disease rather than accepting blame for creating disease that they're creating in their environments. This is the last big fact, and then we're done. 1971, Nixon gave a 62% increase in cancer research. 1977, $815 million was given to cancer research, which is huge at the time, right? Now, the leader of the NIH said that he believed environment was the cause, that 90% of cancer was an environmental cause. He was the leader of it. You want to know how much of that 815 million went to study environmental causes? 10%. Why? Well, because the people pulling the strings, they don't want you looking into much how they're causing the cancer by poisoning your food and poisoning your water and putting waste in all of the cleaning, all of our living places because of profit, because of greed. The 5-year survival rate in the 1930s of cancer was 1 in 5 people. Today, it's 1 in 3. So it went from 20% to 33%. So that's the show. Definitely not too upbeat, right? But I hope you guys enjoyed it. Our healthcare industry is just bloated. And I don't know what the answer is. What's the answer? I don't know, right? Like we hear horror stories in like Europe and with socialized medicine. Today, because people are so litigious, doctors order countless tests on people that are unnecessary. This only increases the cost of the healthcare system. And it's not their fault. They don't want to get sued. So the system is just so broken. And I don't know how you fix it. I think one thing you could fix is you tell people, stop hiding. Like if you are fat and you don't exercise and you eat McDonald's, you need to encourage people to do this stuff, not lie to them and say, no, that's fat phobic or whatever they defend with, because that's the one thing we can control. We can't control what kind of water we drink. We can't control what they put in our ocean, what they pollute in our streams, but we can control ourselves and our own actions. And environment, you try to eat things that don't go bad. Obviously, everyone celebrates. I'm not an insane person, but we can only control ourselves. We can't stop them. But if we all can get healthier as a group and try to go back to this homeopathic viewpoint where now we're not expecting to take a pill to solve any injury that we gave ourselves, like over obesity, high blood pressure, all these things. So that's my positive moment of the show. You have the power to change your life for the better. You can do things that don't include them and make everything. You will do better. Stop relying on them. Look at yourself and make a change, And I say that not to you. I say that to me. I say that to myself all the time, right? We constantly can get better. So that's really it. Science isn't God. and we have made improvements, sanitation, cleanliness, antibiotics. But what do the pharma companies create each day? Profit. That's what they create, profit. All right, guys. Follow me on Twitter at Conspiracy or JAC. I got a Jim Duke coming on next week. I'm excited for Jim. He's an OG. I got a few other things in the works. And at Conspiracy or JAC, conspiracyorjustacoincidence.com. Support the show if you can. Thanks for listening, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. And we're going to be doing Dumbing Down of America, the education system, next week.